I really appreciate this journey. I really appreciate the chance to know you. And I hope one day if I travel to the state next year, I will be able to go to DC and meeting some friends over there. I'm able to invite you for a cup of coffee together. All right?
That would be great. That would be wonderful. Yeah, it's a great premise for for what you're doing to kind of combine your own learning journey and but combine it with other people who would listen to it, because I think people do need help. Even the best, most accomplished people need help. The world is changing so fast, and kind of what makes people valuable is a very interesting thing, and it changes all the time. And I think a lot of people do struggle with this, and for good reason, because um, it's because the world keeps changing, because this particular world of of leadership, of management, of lifelong learning, all these things, they're interconnected, but they do change a lot.
Yeah.
And it just seems that the parameters kind of change. And you're a testament to the fact that this is very global. So you're in Vietnam, I'm in the Washington D.C. area, but yet we're connected, and we know some of the same people, and that sort of thing. Yeah. So I think um, people do need inspiration, as you say. They need information, but they really do need inspiration. And I think that the parts, I didn't watch every single minute, but the things that you had alerted me to of your own interviews were quite interesting and quite illuminating. And several of them were people that I know, a couple of people that I did not know. But even for the ones I knew, that I learned new things just by listening to them talk. So I hope that would be true for people today, that probably I would guess most people would not know about me, but for maybe the ones who do, that they would learn something new by the conversation you and I are having and going to have.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And Bruce, today we're gonna travel time. All right, so we're gonna go back in time. We're gonna examine your dreams when you were young. We're gonna examine the journey that taking from that dream of a young Bruce to what you are doing today. And so, since you're not yet been to our country, and we don't know, so in the future, if you ever travel to this part of the world, you have a new friend here, you have a new
Well, that's great.
family here. So let us
That is
know,
wonderful. Thank you.
and
And
we will
vice
be,
versa.
yeah, absolutely. So, in our culture, Bruce, it's very honored if we can have you to introduce a little bit about who you are and the work that you do for our audience. Would you please do that?
Sure. Well, I'll start with my name. My name is Bruce Rosenstein. I'm based in a suburb of Washington, D.C., called Rockville, Maryland, just very close to D.C. In fact, I was in D.C. this afternoon. And so but I work from home. So I'm one of the lucky people who can work from home. I am the managing editor of a publication called Leader to Leader, which is, as you can tell, is a leadership publication, and it's a co-publication of the Francis Hesselbein Leadership Forum, which is based at the University of Pittsburgh, and also Wiley, which is a huge multinational publishing company that's based in Hoboken, New York. And I should say that today is sort of a really it's a somber day, because the Francis Hesselbein Leadership Forum is named for Francis Hesselbein, and unfortunately, Francis passed away yesterday. She was 107 years old, which is absolutely incredible. And she was really working until fairly recently. So she was, for many years, our editor-in-chief. Last year, our co-editor-in-chief. Wrote a column in every issue. But a tremendous a person in the leadership world. And Marshall Goldsmith, who was one of your guests, has been a tremendous friend and colleague of Francis's over the years. So Francis, of course, I could spend the whole hour kind of talking about her, but I felt I should say that right up front, because her death affected me and so many other people. So it's sad, but she is certainly a very inspirational person, and the Leadership Forum, goes on. They are the co-publisher of our journal with Wiley. So so as I said, our journal, I can work from home, but our people are all over the world. So Frances was actually based in the New York, for the most part, in the New York City area. Wiley, excuse me, as I said, was based in Hoboken, New Jersey, but also they are multinational. So for instance, all of our production people are in India. So the folks I'm working with in India, I'm emailing them all the time. So they're in New Delhi, I believe. And then other people work in different parts. There's Wiley people who work in Massachusetts, in New England. Our cover designer works in California. So we're kind of like all over the world. Mm-hmm. So whether or not some of those people are in offices, I'm working in my home office, and it's a tremendous thing to be able to do, if you can do it. So that is, in terms of current things, and I could talk more about what that entails of being the managing editor, and I also do some writing for our journal. But so that's one part, and then the other part is writing, and that takes a number of forms. I'm currently, for my own blog, writing on LinkedIn articles, which usually, for the most part, start life as my own blog. I've written 2 books about Peter Drucker, the father in modern management. Peter lived to be 95, and he died in 2005. And I've written about him a lot over the years, and so I was very fortunate to know people like Peter and Frances, and I can also maybe explain more that there was a connection between, very long-standing connection between Peter Drucker and Frances Hesselbein. So I've written these 2 books. The first one came out in 2009 from a publisher called Barrett Kohler. And then the second one, also a Drucker-related book, came out in 2013, end of 2013, from a different publisher from McGraw-Hill. And then also in terms of writing, so I 2, besides the blogs and LinkedIn and the writing that I do for Leader to Leader, I regularly write for an entity called Corporate Learning Network, which is something that they do a number of different things, but I do articles that are mostly Drucker focused, not totally, but mostly, because they do a lot of work on Peter Drucker, and that's why they wanted me to do that. I also did, last year, 2021, I did a really cool kind of part of the other things that I do, which is doing things like webinars and presentations, and it used to be more of it in person, not too much of that anymore for obvious reasons, but so much more online. But I did a thing for Corporate Learning Network last year with a great professor from the Drucker School in Claremont, California, named Bernie Jaworski, who's actually the Peter Drucker professor of management at the Claremont Graduate University at the Peter Drucker School of Management. And so we did a kind of a master class online, which is fantastic, like 4 hours long, on kind of on Drucker's work, but as it relates to a change. So I kind of wanted to put that in there, that for the work I do for Corporate Learning Network, that some of it is kind of multimedia, for lack of a better term. And also in the past year, so I've done them for the past year now, I've done a blog, also Drucker related, for a publication called Psychology Today, which is a very well-established publication. It's been around since the 1960s, and I talked with one of the top editors there, and because Peter Drucker had kind of a history with Psychology Today, she decided it'd be a good idea if I would write a blog on different aspects of Drucker, but kind of tailored for an audience, sort of a psychology focused in a way, even though I'm not a psychologist, even though I'm interested in it, but something that would be interesting for readers of that publication. So it's not in the print publication, it's in the online. and so it gets me into kind of a whole new audience for what I do. So that's kind of the broad outlines of what I do. So I can, as long as I meet my deadlines for leader to leader, particularly, I set my own schedule. I'm very fortunate in being able to do that. Where, as I said, I work from home. I set my own schedule, but I have to be very cognizant of what are my commitments, what are my deadlines. If I say I'm going to do something, then I do it, and I feel like I want to meet my deadlines and I want to meet my commitments. And for a publication like Leader to Leader, there's always a number of deadlines, and it's not just my deadlines, but it's the people that I work with. So all these processes can happen, and that the articles can come out online, and we're also in print, which, as you know, a lot of publications now are no longer in print, but we are. So, what I'm saying here is there's a lot of coordination that has to happen in order to get these articles online, to get the cover done, to get the print version out there for our subscribers. So that's sort of in a nutshell what my life entails right now, my professional life anyway.
And Bruce, thanks for sharing that. And we're going to examine that all together, how the journey that takes you to what you are doing today. But before we're doing that, I want to jump right into the role that you do at Leader to Leader before I forget about it, all right? So as a managing editor for Leader to Leader, what exactly that role entails, though?
Yeah, so my role entails, I said, a lot of coordination. So when you think about it, there's a number of different things. If you were to look, let's say, physically at the journal, and so you would see, generally you would see about 9 or 10, give or take, full-length articles, which are, in our cases, are around anywhere from 2,500 to maybe 3,000 words. And I should say that our articles are written by leaders for leaders. So we feel that our readership is leaders or maybe aspiring leaders. We have a lot of people who are, like maybe in MBA programs or in doctorate programs who are reading us all over the world, by the way, because Wiley, as I said, is multinational. So, but we don't have staff writers. We don't have freelance writers. We have leaders. So they could be either maybe CEOs of companies. They could be presidents of universities. They could be, some of them are military leaders. A number of them, though, are thought leaders. And, I'm sure you're familiar with that term. So two of the people that actually three of the people that I know that you interviewed, Marshall Goldsmith, Dave Ulrich, and Ed Hess, I worked with all three of those folks, and I would put them in the thought leader category, right? Because they're not, they're professors or they're coaches or whatever, but they're not somebody who's like leading an organization. So they're more thought leaders. So those are the different types of leaders that we work with. So you think about that. So how does that happen? So generally, I work long ahead of time, meaning we have long what they call lead times. So I know that we have quarterly publications. So I have to go out and find those authors. So some of them are repeat authors. So I worked with them before, and maybe they get in touch with me, or I hear about through a publicist or somebody else that they have a new book coming out or whatever it might be. So I might contact them and say, would you like to publish another article for us? Or if it's a new, sometimes I work with publicists who work for either publishing companies or independent publicists. And so I work with several of these folks on a regular basis, and they kind of pitch me on ideas about, very often that are book driven. So somebody has a new book, and so they would write an article kind of based on something related to that book. So I'm working on those, and then I'm getting in their articles, and I'm kind of watching those deadlines so that when I ask them for something, that I get that at least reasonably around that time. And then I work with that author on editing. And then it kind of goes on to other people too for review. So there's a whole other process beyond that. But I also write. There's something called From the Editors at the beginning, so it doesn't have my byline, but it's something I write that's explaining what's going to be in this particular issue. And then something else that I write that does not have a byline, but something that I really enjoy writing is called From the Front Lines, and it comes at the end of the journal, and it's about 1,000 words. I do 2 in each issue, and so what I do there is these are not strictly leadership articles, but they're articles that would be of interest to leaders, but they're about usually cutting edge research. Okay, so what I do is I go out and I find articles that I think would be really interesting on a particular topic. Maybe it's not well known, maybe it's somewhat well known, but they have an interesting new angle because of their research. Like we did one on stress in the workplace. So it's a very well known topic, but this particular author had some new academic research about it. But sometimes the topics are a bit more obscure, and I find it really interesting. So I just, and very often I do not know these authors. I might not have even heard of them before, but I really liked it. So I will just email them, because we do this all by email. I email them the questions, they email me the answers, and then I write the article based on that. So I explain about leader to leader, because generally I find that these folks haven't heard of us, but I explain what we are. I send them information about how they can learn more, links to articles, what have you, and then I say, here's what I need to do the article. It's going to be fairly short. I'm going to just send you 4 questions. And I would say the vast majority of people say yes, because they do, they want their research to be seen by more people. So I feel like I get a great education on not only learning about these folks, and in some cases staying in touch with them, but in seeing how for some of these academics, they what's something that could seem kind of very narrow turns out to be very fascinating in terms of how they've studied it. Like we had one professor who, what he was studying was about corporate headquarters and all these different things about building of corporate headquarters, deciding on what sort of headquarters you're going to have. Now, this was before COVID, so it was a little bit different, but still very, very fascinating. We had one recently on loneliness in the workplace, which is a big issue. Loneliness in general is a big issue, especially with COVID. But these folks really did a lot of research about loneliness as it applied to the workplace and what managers and leaders could do to maybe help people who are experiencing loneliness. So I feel like we're really helping our readers by, we're kind of introducing them to some of the subjects, we're introducing them to new thought leaders. We say what the article is, in this case for From the Front Lines, we say what it is, what the journal was that it appeared in. So people can then go to that article and read it, and maybe they even want to contact the author on their own. So those are kind of, for the most part. But again, it's, as I said, not only coordination, but working well with other people and doing it where you're not doing it in person for the most part. So I'm doing this by Zoom meetings or team meetings or phone calls or emails. So you have to kind of be good at working with people in those kind of formats.
Wow. I admire your works a lot, Bruce, because you're able to not only helping the leaders or the thought leaders or those academia experts to share more of their data onto their works onto the audience out there, right? But also helping the audience to enrich their life, enrich their mind by being able to connect to the amazing leaders, amazing people, and learn from their piece of the master piece of works, right? So that is very noble thing that you do, and it also benefiting for you, because you are you've been able to keep on learning new things, keep on expanding your knowledge. So let's examine what you do now versus your dream when you was young. All right. So
Okay.
when I was a little boy of 5, 6 years old, Bruce, I wanted to become an astronaut, and I wanted to travel space so that I can jump in a different planet. All right. But life did not give me anything near what I wanted to do. So for that little boy, little Bruce, right? What was his dream about the future he's gonna have?
Yeah, it's a very interesting of way of looking at it, and also about how dreams meet reality at some point. At least those young dreams, and some people obviously do pursue them, but for me, it didn't quite work out that way. So I would say, in terms of, if you really kind of go back that far, and I believe I can, to that kind of age group that you're talking about, I was, of course, I didn't articulate it as dreams. I don't know really what I thought about, but I was really into music, not playing music, although I did try playing and it just didn't work out. But in terms of listening to music or rock music, I was very, very interested in that. And I used to all the time listen to the radio, records, the music that was on TV. Of course, there was nothing like now. I mean, so for people watching this, they have to realize that unless they're around, kind of my age group, they would know that there was very little music on TV when I was 5 years old. Very, very little. But there was certainly some. There were some very interesting shows, and I was really fascinated by these shows and fascinated by the radio and listening to. So again, now think about this. We're talking about a time long before Spotify or the internet or internet radio, anything like that. Nothing like that was anywhere near available. So you would be, for the most part, your local radio stations. Now, where I was born and grew up was a city called, sort of a small, medium-sized city called Scranton, Pennsylvania. And Scranton is where President Biden is from. President Biden was born in Scranton, not all that far from where I lived. I would say maybe a 10-minute drive from where I lived. And he lived there, I think, till the age of 6. And for some people might know of Scranton because it was the fictional setting of the TV show The Office, in America anyway, not in Britain. The original show was in Britain, but the American show was fictionally set in Scranton. And so it really became kind of a big thing. Now, this was maybe, 15 or so years ago, long after I left. But again, I was very interested in music. And also I really developed it. The one thing that did work out was an interest in writing. I kind of realized early that I liked to write, but I didn't really think that was something that I would, at least back then, that I would do. But if you sort of put the pieces together, for instance, I really enjoyed reading the newspaper and maybe looking through some magazines. Whenever it is, you kind of start reading. So that was the dreams, but in terms of doing something around music, and it took a while for that to, I would say, let's say, work its way out of my system. So I actually when I went to college, I went to American University. It's called the American University here in Washington, D.C. I came to Washington area and I never left. Came here a long time ago. So I actually majored in communications, which was, in my sense, was mostly radio, TV. And I just discovered that, so I really kind of thought, doing something about really like being like a music DJ, was something that I might want to do because I love listening to that. However, I learned when this is what I did all 4 years, obviously studying other things too, but I learned pretty quickly that radio as a career was not something that I wanted to do, and for lots of reasons. But however, for a number of years, I did do radio on kind of a different level. I did college radio. and I did a college radio station that was for another school after I graduated. That was actually quite fun. I did another thing where, in some ways, I guess dreams came true, but not in terms of career. I did a freelance work for actually a number of years for the Voice of America. So that is something where my work actually was heard all over the world. Not my voice. I was not voicing the show, but I was actually writing and choosing the music for a rock music radio show that was heard all over the world. It was actually quite cool. So I did, I shouldn't say that my dreams didn't come true. It's just that as a career, it was just not for me a good way to go. So, but I think it's important. For instance, in listening to some of your other guests, and which I found quite fascinating, at least two or three of them that I heard said that their career path was kind of very disjointed. And so I think this is a common thing, and that was for mine as well. And so I think that one thing I want to say, and I'd be happy to skip around to any of these things, but it's almost impossible for me to, very, sort of cogently say about my career in sort of a linear way, because it really wasn't all that linear. But what I do feel very strongly about is that it was all connected. So all these waypoints along the line, even if they don't seem like they're connected, they are connected. And so, like when I said that I was very interested as a young boy in, what we would now call media. I mean, we wouldn't have called it that then. Maybe that term was around then. But in terms of, again, before online, but there was radio, there was television, there was, lots and lots of print. So even though I didn't really go into that to work in that per se, what happened years later is I worked around music. I actually wrote a lot about rock music. I still do every once in a while on my blog. I find it, fun because I still listen to music quite a bit. And I have a lot of friends in music who are both musicians and in some, still in the music industry. But I did a variety of things around music, sort of small business sort of things, writing about it for years after I graduated, from college. But I realized that just was not, as a career, it just was not, as much as I loved it, it was not going anywhere. And so I actually got into something where a field that has lots of, career changers, which is library and information science. So I got a master's of library and information science here in Washington at the Catholic University of America, which is, a really good school for library and information science. So what happened then was, and as I say, these things all connect, where you have parts of your life that you're not doing them on a day-to-day basis, but they connect to what you're doing now. Yeah. So that enabled me, by doing the degree, and which was only like a year and a half to get my master's. So it was really pretty good. And this was quite some time ago. But I was very fortunate to get a job not too long after my degree was over, at USA Today newspaper, which is became a very big success. It just had its 40th anniversary not too long ago in September. I was there for 21 years, which is pretty amazing these days, for anybody to have a job for 21 years. But I worked there as a researcher, for the most part, librarian, researcher, for 21 years. And so USA Today, for people who don't know it, is divided into 4 sections: news, money, which is business, but personal finance as well, life, and sports. All these things that I was interested in. I was a big sports fan growing up. So here was a way to kind of channel that, and so it was fantastic, So all these things that, I might have just done for free were now part of my job. Plus I got to work with all sorts of cool people. So I did that for 21 years. And while I was doing that, by the way, I decided that for a number of reasons, I became interested in teaching, which I never thought I would be, interested in at all. But I became interested in it, and I had so the way I got into it was, and again, I never was a full-time teacher, but um, I expressed I wasn't sure quite how to go about it. But we had somebody who was in our HR department, and I know you had Dave Ulrich as a guest, talking about HR. But we had somebody in our HR department who you could just kind of go and talk to about things that you were interested in that might, if you wanted to kind of get into something where it would relate to your job at USA Today, but you weren't asking for like a totally new job, in other words, but you weren't even asking for a job, but you were just saying, hey, I have this interest. Can you point me in the right direction? Are there things that I should know about? And so, and this is really just like one conversation. But what this person said to me was, and I said, well, I think I'm interested in teaching, but I've never done it before. And what she said to me was, do you have somebody at where you got your degree that you could talk to about this, just to find out what's doable and what's not doable? And I said, yes, I do. And I called this person, and so she said that I could come. She gave me, this was like, let's say May, end of May, and she said, on July 11th, I remember the date specifically, she said, on July 11th, you can come to my class and do a guest lecture on the work that you do at the USA Today Library. She said, I think my students would appreciate that. And also, you would get an idea of preparing for a lecture and just seeing how it goes. So I did a lot of preparation for it. And July 11th rolled around, and I went in and I did the guest lecture, and it went really well. And as fate would have it, about 2 months later, a job opened up there as an adjunct. So you weren't a full-time professor, you'd just be doing one class. But a job opened up for teaching on a subject that really I knew a lot about. It was related to what I did at USA Today. So I got a call, and again, it opened up only because the person who was teaching it was moving away, and he couldn't. This was the days before you could do things remotely, so that's why the job opened up. The dean at the time called me and said, that this professor had recommended me, because the dean was somebody who was not around when I was there as a student, and would I like to come in and talk about it? And I came in and I interviewed with her, and I ended up getting the job. It was amazing. So I taught mostly once a year. There's sometimes it was more frequent, but I taught for many, many years, mostly once a year. The last time was 2019 for a variety of reasons. It hasn't happened since then. Hopefully it will. But the thing was, my teaching, doing that, I use those. Not only do I use what I learned working in the USA Today Library and being a student in my work now, leader, to leader, and writing books and whatever, but I also can lean on what I have learned as a teacher. I stay in touch with a number of my students, and just learning there of how you prepare for a class, and how you manage your time so everything gets done on time. So that's also really helped me when I go and I do webinars, or I'm on a panel with somebody, because I've led a lot of panels at school at Catholic. So and also when I've done my own webinars, where it's a little bit different, because people are not enrolling in your class for a degree. It's an important part of what they're doing. They're doing it just for that one thing. They're maybe not getting even a certificate for it, but they're coming to learn. So I take it really seriously, and I kind of take it like as if I'm doing a class at Catholic University. So I could say more about this, but really all these things are interconnected. So I feel that so just to go back to my music days as a kid, that comes into play now. Like when I do write about my on my blog and I interview people, let's say sometimes who are involved in music in some way. So I know what to ask them. I know kind of what's important, and so and also just in terms of creativity. I mean, I'm very interested in creativity as a whole. So some of the people who've written for Leader to Leader are part of what they do is they're musicians. They may not be making their money at it, but it's part of their creativity. So I feel I can relate to that, even though I am not a musician. The fact of the matter is, I know a lot about music kind of as a topic. So I feel all these things are related. So I think one thing people might take away from watching this today, or whenever it is they do watch it, is to even if something ends in their life, and maybe it's something that they liked. Like I really liked that job at USA Today, but it's just one of these things that had to end after 21 years. But that you take parts of that, you take what was good at that, or what you learned from that, and you apply it in some other way, and so it doesn't go to waste.
Yep.
I think people shouldn't feel so. Even though, like your question about a dream, even though I wouldn't have conceptualized it that way, kind of age 5, the way it was. So, yes, I didn't get to end up, working around music all the time, but I did certainly some of the time. And sports. And by the way, another thing that in terms of the change, there is so much now in terms of the sports business where if I had known at the age of 5 that sports business would be a legitimate kind of degree to get in school and then go work into, and then there's a career path for it. But back then, there really wasn't. There was a business, but it wasn't nearly as well developed as it is now. But as I said, I was able to take that love of sports and that knowledge of trivia or whatever, and then apply that when I worked at USA Today, and it worked out kind of fantastically well.
And then Rose, you see how beautiful and really amazing how life is when it comes in full cycle, right? Because what the more I talk to people, the more I find it very fascinating that life always has its way to make it full cycle for us all. And then we might not be able to do the thing that we really really wanted to do, but we always ended up doing something related to it here and there, and
Right.
that is the fulfilling part of our lives, the amazing thing. And so tell us about how your journey go and leading to leader to leader.
Yes, well, I think that really came about because of my work in the Peter Drucker world. So,
Oh,
again, Peter Drucker was considered the father of modern management. And there was something else, by the way, that came directly out of library school, because even though I had heard of Peter Drucker before this point, we're talking a number of years ago, uh, as it happens, one of Drucker's very large books was the textbook for my library management class. It was a summer course, so we didn't have to read the entire book, but we had to read a fair amount of it. And I got really fascinated. So he was not talking about libraries per se, but he was talking about management. And the more I read, the more fascinated I got. So I then started reading everything I could find about Drucker. Both that he wrote, that other people wrote. About 15 or so, no, I would say about a decade later, maybe under a decade later, I got to see him do an all-day lecture in Washington, D.C., at George Washington University, and I was just fascinated. I was just mesmerized the whole time. I didn't get to meet him, but I was there in the audience. He was in his 80s, by the way, and he did this all day. He had nobody with him. He sat on a couch or something, or not on a couch, but on a chair, an easy chair sort of thing, all day. And I mean all day, like 8 hours. and he was in his early 80s and gave this fantastic talk. A bit of it was prepared, but most of it was not. So I had kind of started to develop kind of Peter as a role model. I was working at, by then I was working at USA Today, and I had a lot of writing experience by then. I had written, this was another thing about rock music. I'd written a lot about rock music besides the VOA, for like these sort of smaller rock, publications and journals. So I had a lot of writing experience, but Drucker really made me interested much more, in management and related subjects and in business. So after a while, I would say it took a few more years after that, but at USA Today, I was able to actually start writing. Besides being a librarian and a researcher, I wrote about, for the money section, I wrote about business and management books, and Peter Drucker became a specialty. So I wrote about anything that he wrote during that time, or if books came out about him, for the most part, I wrote about it and I interviewed the author. So I kind of built up this knowledge. And then, again, now this does relate to leader, because Drucker, besides all these books that he did and his work as a consultant and as a professor, and having the school named after him, the Drucker School of Management in Claremont, California, part of his consulting work, he would do, free consulting, pro bono consulting for nonprofit organizations. And it would come about in a variety of ways. He did a lot of arts organizations, by the way, music and visual art. But one of the organizations he did pro bono consulting for was the Girl Scouts of the USA. So a very, long-standing, well-developed organization. So Frances Hesselbein, before Leader to Leader, was the CEO of the Girl Scouts of the USA. And she met Peter at some sort of like, it was like a cocktail party or something. It was a professional, where they sort of served food before the lecture started, something like that. And they met. And so Peter got sort of really interested in, he was interested in nonprofits anyway, but he kind of got interested in, as Frances told him about, what the Girl Scouts stood for. And I think he already knew about the Girl Scouts, but here he is talking to the Girl Scouts of the USA. So I think one thing led to another, and he ended up doing this pro bono consulting for them. So they worked together very closely over a period of years. And when Frances retired, she and these two other nonprofit leaders wanted to do an institute that would be or a foundation, as it was then, based on management for nonprofits, which back then in 1990 was not as well developed as it is today. And they felt they needed they wanted to use Peter's name, so they needed his okay on it, and they also wanted him to be involved in some way. So they were able to convince him. So Frances was kind of like running it, I guess you would say, but in New York, but they were able to convince him to kind of lending his name to it. So originally it was called the Peter F. Drucker Foundation for Nonprofit Management. And then, to be involved in various ways. So that's how I first learned about Frances Hesselbein. And eventually because I had written a lot about Drucker, I met Frances and I showed her the articles that I had written about Peter, and she found them quite interesting. And so we kind of stayed in touch. I also wrote about her later on for USA Today. But kind of after that, when I told her about this book that I wanted to do, she invited me to do an article for Leader to Leader. So the key thing there was it wasn't a done deal that it was going to happen. It still had to go through the editor. And the funny thing was it wasn't funny at the time for me, but the first time when I submitted to the editor, he just felt it wasn't really quite good enough, or it wouldn't meet their needs. So, but he said, he gave me some guidance. If you want to change it in various ways, I will look at it again. So I did, and he liked that better. So that article ran. I had another one, a couple years later or so. And the key thing there was because somebody separate, it really didn't have anything to do in the beginning anyway with Francis, somebody who I'd worked with a lot, who knew my work in the Drucker world and that I was familiar with Leader to Leader, found out that there was going to be an opening for a managing editor of Leader to Leader. And she said, I think you should apply for it.
Wow.
And I didn't have that much editing experience then, but I did have a lot of writing experience, and I had a lot of networking experience, which, they also needed. And what I think the key thing here, by the way, is what this person said to me is, what you should do is you should talk to, and she gave me the name, and she mentioned the name. I won't mention it here, but he was then the managing editor who was kind of retiring. So he was the person I'd worked with on these articles. So remember, he rejected the first thing that I did, but then he was very helpful to me in helping me so I could write something that did work. And she said, I should send him your resume and see what he thinks. Because the resumes were to go to somebody else. But she said, before you send it to the other people, you should send it to him. And he was very nice looking at this thing and saying, well, no, you pitched this the wrong way. You should pitch more of your networking experience and the fact that you knew Drucker and all this kind of thing. And so I was able to kind of recast my resume. And I did have some editing experience then, because I had worked after USA Today for a very large community college here in this area called Northern Virginia Community College, and they gave me all this editing stuff to do. So it was like fantastic, because I learned about editing, on the job from them. So I was able to say to Leader, I had a, editing experience. So all this stuff kind of worked together, and so once I did send them my resume and talked to them, and I talked to them about, they asked me for what my plans would be and how I would work with people. So even though I didn't have the experience that maybe some other people had, I think they liked that I had all these other things, and that I could network with people, and that, by the way, I already had a network of people like publicists, because I knew them from working at USA Today, because I was reviewing books at USA Today. So I kind of had these things in place, and then I was willing to learn. I did some shadowing of that managing editor. I worked a lot with my editorial director. So I felt that I learned a lot in those ways, and that's a way of kind of connecting those dots.
And Bruce, your life, you really, proactively seeking for what's next, and instead of waiting for the bus to come, you create your own bus, right? You create your own route, and that leading to the amazing thing that you do now. So how's, if you look back at your life and all the journey that been here, how's working with amazing people helped you to enlarge your perspective and enrich your life though?
Yeah, I think it was a part of it for me was just realizing that they were amazing people, that they did have something to say, and especially maybe for people who weren't in my field, but I realized that I could learn a lot um, by by talking to them, and then get to think, well, how did they learn, what they learned? So kind of maybe if I could learn a little bit about their career journey by maybe reading about it, let's say, even if I couldn't talk to them to do it. So I think it was things that later on I felt were characteristics of Drucker, excuse me, which were being, developing listening skills, being open-minded, and especially being observant. I felt that was a big thing for Drucker. I think some people say they're observant, but they really aren't. So that you're kind of, looking at something and looking at what the ramifications are, and looking at it maybe in some detail. And if you're looking at, let's say, some piece of, creative work, what can I learn from it? What was somebody, trying to do? is there a message here that I need to learn about? And also kind of going back into, so from musicians, so where I can't learn anything technical from them, but I could certainly learn from reading things about them or learning about their career, about kind of what they did. So really this kind of being open-ended or open-minded, I mean, and also the value of networking. And really, I didn't know about networking per se until I would say I was at least in graduate school at Catholic University, and then I started, getting an idea of it. So now I try to, when I do seminars sometimes or webinars, I try to work that in. In fact, I did one for a library association a year or so ago that was just on networking for librarians, because librarians very often are introverts, and by the way, I feel like I'm an introvert, but I can change that when I need to be. So some people maybe would go to, if you can go to, you don't have as many now, but if you go to one of these professional events where they're, like I described earlier for Francis and Peter, and they're serving food at the beginning, and you really should be talking to people and listening to what they have, especially listening to what they have to say. But sometimes librarians can be kind of reserved in doing that. But then again, once you get them talking, then they shift to another mode where they really can be quite talkative about what they're interested in. So I think that's very important, is to develop the sense of networking, even if you don't call it networking, something where you can learn from other people and they can learn, they can learn from you.
Beautiful, beautiful. Hey, Bruce, if you work for leader to leaders, right? So you got a chance to talk to many amazing leaders. You've been exposing to many varieties of topics of expertise and stuff like that. And in the past couple of 20 to 30 episodes that we've been talking, we want to boil down to just, for example, one thing. It's like one thing, that one big thing that matters. All right. So Bruce, if you can boil it down to one thing that leaders need to develop, need to change, so that they can lead organizations better, they can lead the future workplace better. So what would that one thing be in your professional experience?
Yeah, that's kind of tough, because I would say at a baseline, it's self-awareness. And one thing I say that is, a baseline for leaders should be integrity. But if they don't have integrity, and some don't, let's face it, if they don't have integrity, it's going to be hard for them to develop it. But I think if they have some self-awareness of themselves and maybe realize, well, maybe for something like integrity, it can be, maybe they can't change themselves totally. But so I think that idea of self-awareness, and maybe self-awareness related to some of those qualities I was talking about before, about observing and being open-minded and learning, and things like emotional intelligence. So I say self-awareness, so they're aware of these qualities within themselves that maybe they might need to develop on others. Maybe they really do have that quality of emotional intelligence, but it's not a big part of their life right now. But it could be. Maybe they do have capacity to learn, but that's not something that's well developed right now. And some leaders, I feel, they're really, you put it well, because I do learn a lot from whatever I can get from them, either in talking to them or emailing from them, or just working on the article to help them say what they want to say, because sometimes they know so much that it's hard for them to, even though we're not talking about their entire career, let's say, we're talking maybe one aspect, and it may not even be about their career, but we need to get them to be concise and cogent about it. So if I can help them do that, I've done a great service to them, and and to readers. So I think it's but it is a challenge. One thing, um, one thing is a challenge. To just think about it. And I would think it'd be a challenge for leaders to then say, hey, what is that one thing that I can develop in myself? But if I can kind of go with self-awareness, I will go with it.
So self-awareness is the answer. Thanks a lot, Bruce. I have two last
Sure,
questions before we end this conversation. All right. So
sure.
you still have time?
I'm sorry, what's that?
You have time for this? For,
For some reason, your voice is cutting out just a little bit. So
I'm asking, do you have time for the next two questions? Because
yeah, yes.
Wonderful, thank you. So, Bruce, my wife and we have been on the quest to help people to improve their ability to think. All right, because we believe that our thinking capability these days has been influenced a lot and it's been diminishing. So, if we can help share insights from experts of how they grow their ability to think. So our listener, if they can listen to the tips and the advices and practicing them, then we hope that they can improve their ability to think also. So over the years, how have you been helping you to improve your ability to think, Bruce?
I think I've improved it by just reading a lot. I read books, I read magazine articles, journal articles, newspapers. So I read quite a bit on a number of different subjects, and I think, how do all these things compare? So it may or may not be about thinking as a discipline, because I think there it's something where um, is maybe individual to people about how they carve out time for thinking or get rid of distractions if that's possible. But I would say I'm always thinking. I'm a pretty introspective person. So, but a lot of it is reflection on things like what I've read or what I've maybe seen on something like what you and I are doing now, or a television show. So I feel all that helps me thinking, because I feel I am good at making connections between, and this is something Drucker did a lot, making connections between disparate parts of, of thought or of things that you read. So I feel that being a big reader is really helpful, but then also reflecting about that, reflecting about what you read and about thinking about how does this relate to my life or my work as a leader or my work in business or whatever it might be. So I think that's a very key thing, reading, observing, listening, and then relating it to your life. I also take a lot of notes, if I can. It's hard in conversation, but I might try to remember something and write it down later or put it into my iPhone of things. So I try to keep notes on things and then go back to them. And I find that that is very, very helpful. And I think that's something that's, it's something that people can do because, just take out a pen and paper or type it into your phone. If somebody has said something that you find, kind of really interesting, or you've had an experience that you found quite interesting. Or, they're watching your show and, they could pause it, or maybe if they're listening to the recording, and pause it and write down something. So I would really recommend that. And that's something that worked for me that I think probably has worked for lots of other people as well.
Thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing. Bruce, the last question is about the future. All right, so we be travel time to the past. We knew that you like music when you were young, and then you also found out that you also like writing, and right, and then that leading to the career that you study in communications, working for USA Today, then eventually working for Leader to Leader, and and you wrote books also, and you didn't have time to talk about that for this conversation. So we're gonna talk about it into a different conversation in the future. All right?
That would be great.
Yes.
Thank you.
So now we want to head into a future a little bit, Bruce. Is there anything exciting that you are working on? You want to share with me and the audience so we can celebrate with you in advance?
Oh, that's great. I would say that I don't have any, sort of firm things. I think it's sort of extensions of what I'm already doing. I am thinking of doing a podcast, by the way, because even though there's so many podcasts, I think it'd be a nice extension of what I do. Um, you know, in terms of the future, my second book was Create Your Future the Peter Drucker Way, because so I feel like I've been very future oriented. Kind of because of that. Kind of in writing the book. But I feel that something related to again to communications, whether it's a podcast or something related to that, where I get to use my skills and my interest for those things that I've always had, but to kind of get to do them in that way. And also, in terms of teaching, there's one reason why I say that this may or may not take the form of a podcast, because something where I could teach online, because I think it's these days teaching in person. I'm not sure for me. It may be in the cards at some point, but teaching something totally new, in other words, that I could initiate on my own, that maybe I wasn't so maybe tied to any one organization to do, and then also something that I could do while I do the other things.
Yep.
One subject that I've written about a lot, and that I've really been involved just by working with people like Peter Drucker and Francis Hesselbein, is what I would call productive aging and longevity. So Francis lived to be 107. Peter Drucker lived to be 95. My own parents, by the way, my father lived to 95 and my mother lived to 90. So hopefully I have good longevity in my genes. But I've written about longevity and productive aging, and I feel like I'll be writing more about that, and maybe that will also be intersecting into this kind of teaching and podcasting work that I hope to do.
Beautiful.
So I hope that's a complete enough answer for you.
Beautiful, Bruce. Well, I wish all the plan, all the dream that you want to accomplish next will be fulfilled. All right, and you will have another journey that is also exciting, and also it helps you to continue learning and expanding. And I also want to say thank you for being so generous to spend your time joining my show, and hope one day that we're gonna meet in person.
I would hope so. Well, you're quite welcome, and I really do hope you'd be a very, very cool person to have a cup of coffee with. So I really hope we can work that out.
Thank you very much, Bruce. Have a wonderful evening, and again, thank you very much.
You're quite welcome. Thanks to you. Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.